Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see 'em. 72-year-old Evelyn Carter froze beside her silver sedan, her grocery bags dangling like weights from each trembling hand. She had just finished a long day volunteering at the community center, still wearing her faded Meals for Seniors sweater. She looked like someone's grandmother, because she was someone's grandmother, yet the police officer spoke to her like she was an armed threat. Another officer snickered before adding, "Man, Christmas season really brings the thieves out, huh? Even the gray-haired ones." The two officers exchanged a laugh while Evelyn stood motionless, her heart pounding so hard it felt like a drum in her chest. I didn't steal anything," she whispered. But Officer Briggs, tall, broad, and too eager for confrontation, marched toward her with a smug grin. "Funny, because we got a report of a black female attempting to steal a 2021 silver Camry. Matches you perfectly." He dragged the word black like it tasted bitter in his mouth. Evelyn swallowed, clutching her purse strap. "This is my car. I've owned it for—" Briggs cut her off, stepping so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "Lady, I've been doing this job for 18 years. You think you people can outsmart me?" You people. The words stung deeper than the cold wind. Officer number 2 circled her car like a shark, whistling mockingly. "Wow, pushing 70 and still boosting rides. I gotta admit, that's new." The two officers exchanged a laugh while Evelyn stood motionless, her heart pounding so hard it felt like a drum in her chest. I didn't steal anything," she whispered. But Briggs barked at her. "Drop the bags! Step away now!" Her eggs, her milk, her dinner ingredients for her granddaughter's birthday, everything spilled as she let the bags fall to the ground. "Good girl," he muttered. Evelyn felt heat rise in her chest, humiliation, fear, confusion, all swelling at once. She raised her hands slowly, palms open. "Officer, the keys are right here in my—" "Don't move!" He lunged at her so fast she flinched. A grandmother flinching at someone who was supposed to protect her. A teenage boy filming from afar gasped, "Yo, why's he going after the old lady like that?" But Briggs didn't care. He grabbed Evelyn's wrist so roughly she cried out, "Stop! You're hurting me!" Resisting, huh? Typical. He twisted her arm higher, forcing her to bend forward over the hood of the very car she had bought with her own retirement savings. Her cheek pressed against the cold metal. Her purse fell off her shoulder and landed on the pavement. Briggs called out to the other officer, "Run the plates! Let's see who she stole it from!" Officer number 2 punched the plate number into the squad car's laptop, still grinning. "This is gonna be good." Evelyn felt tears slipping down her face, not just from the pain, from the sheer indignity. She had raised 2 daughters on a librarian's salary. She had survived segregation. She had marched for voting rights. She had lived long enough to see her grandson graduate from the Air Force Academy. And here she was, treated like trash in a grocery store lot because 2 officers couldn't imagine that a black grandmother could own a new car. The sun dipped lower as more people gathered. A woman whispered, "This is ridiculous." A man said, "Just let her explain." But Briggs didn't want explanations. He wanted dominance. He leaned down, voice dripping with mockery. "Tell me, Grandma, when you steal cars, do you prefer night or day shifts? Or is this like a retirement hobby?" Something inside Evelyn snapped. Her voice cracked but carried strength. "I don't steal. I never have. Check the registration. It's in my purse, please." Briggs laughed. "Oh, we'll check it after we check you for weapons." "Weapons?" Evelyn almost choked on her breath. "I'm 72. Briggs shrugged. "Hey, grandmas hide stuff too." He started patting her down roughly, even though she was tiny, frail, and clearly no threat. The crowd murmured angrily. That's when Officer Number 2 suddenly froze. Briggs? Briggs didn't look up. What? Bro, you need to see this. What? Briggs snapped, annoyed. Officer 2 turned the laptop screen toward him. The color vanished from his face. He blinked hard, then again. The color drained from his cheeks.
Evelyn couldn't see the screen, but she saw their expressions shift. Confusion, fear, disbelief. Briggs stepped closer to the computer, eyes darting across the data. What the? No. No way. This can't be real. Officer Number 2 swallowed. It's her car. Registered to Evelyn Carter, but that's not all. Briggs scrolled. What the hell is this? The crowd leaned in. Evelyn straightened slightly, still pinned but sensing the change in the air. Officer Number 2 whispered, "Why didn't dispatch tell us?" Briggs whispered back, "Because this file is restricted." Restricted. A word normally reserved for military, federal agents, national security personnel. The officer stared at the next line on the screen, a line that made Briggs's jaw fall open. "Briggs," the second officer breathed. "She's not just some old lady." He swallowed again. "She's got a federal security classification." Briggs's eyes went wide. "What kind?" Officer Number 2 looked at him stunned. "The kind we've only seen in movies." Briggs slowly turned toward Evelyn, hands shaking for the first time that night. Who was this woman? Why would a grandmother's record trigger restricted access? Why would her name flag federal-level permissions? Why did the system suddenly lock itself and flash a warning? Access limit reached, authorization required, federal protection file. The crowd fell silent. Evelyn lifted her head. For the first time, Briggs saw her not as a suspect, but as someone far, far above his pay grade. He stepped back. "Ma'am," he stuttered. Who exactly are you?" Evelyn breathed out slowly, calmly. "I told you," she said softly, her voice steady now. "This is my car." The story was only beginning. And the truth behind that restricted federal file, it would turn the entire town upside down.
Eleanor barely made it halfway across the parking lot before the second cop stepped in front of her again, boots scraping the asphalt, hand resting on his belt like he was stopping an active threat instead of a 72-year-old grandmother with arthritis in both knees. "Ma'am," he said, stretching the word like he was talking to a toddler, "I'm going to need you to slow down and answer a few questions." Eleanor stopped. Not because he told her to, but because she suddenly felt that old familiar ache in her chest. Not medical, emotional. The one she'd spent years burying. The one that came from people deciding who she was before she even opened her mouth. Behind her, the first officer scoffed loudly enough for the parking lot to hear. "You see how she keeps walking away?" he said. "Guilty behavior, if you ask me." Guilty. They threw that word around like candy. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her keys. She didn't raise her voice. She never had to. She simply said, "Officers, I told you, this is my car, and I have groceries melting in the trunk." The taller one, Officer Daniels, laughed again. Not a chuckle, not amusement. This was mean laughter, dismissive. Aimed downward, not outward. "Oh, please," he said, waving a hand at her Lexus like it was a spaceship she couldn't possibly own. "Lady, this car is worth more than your Social Security check." The jab hit harder than they realized, and they loved that. People nearby were slowing down, watching, whispering. Some filming on their phones, that modern shield of just in case. But no one stepped in. No one ever stepped in at this part, where the bullying was still polite enough to hide behind. Daniel circled the car again, muttering just loud enough, "Nice leather? No way she paid for this. Bet it's stolen from her last employer. Probably cleaned houses in a neighborhood like this." The other cop nodded. "Yep, you know how it goes." They really didn't know. Eleanor steadied her breath. Decades of training, real training, taught her to stay calm. Not military calm, not law enforcement calm, another kind. They didn't know that yet. Daniels reached out, snatching the keys right out of her hand. Eleanor flinched, not because she was scared, but because she knew what came next. That rush cops got when they believed they'd caught someone. That petty thrill of power. He held the keys up, shaking them like confiscated contraband. "You mind telling us again how you got this car?" His tone had sharpened, no more fake politeness. "I bought it," Eleanor replied, voice steady. "Brand new, cash." "Sure you did." Then he leaned in closer, face inches from hers. "Listen carefully. If you tell us the truth now, I won't charge you with resisting. But if you keep lying, this is going to escalate." Escalate, a word she carried scars from. The second cop took out his notebook, flipping dramatically through blank pages. "Let's start simple, Grandma. Where'd you say you worked?" Eleanor's jaw clenched. "I didn't say." "And why's that? Something to hide?" His smirk deepened. She stared him down. "Because I retired years ago." "Uh-huh. And what'd you do before retirement?" This was the moment everything always came down to. Her career, her credentials, her history. A history most people would never believe unless they saw it cold, stamped, sealed, and government verified. But she'd learned long ago that some men don't want truth. They want dominance. Eleanor took a breath. "I worked with the federal government." "Ooh," Daniels mocked, widening his eyes dramatically. "Federal government, like what? Postal Service?" A few people laughed timidly from a distance. But Eleanor didn't break eye contact, didn't blink. She simply said, "No, not the Postal Service." Daniels shrugged, bored. "All right then, we'll see what your job says when we run your record." He motioned to the second cop, who stepped forward and grabbed Eleanor's wrist. "Turn around, we're detaining you until this is sorted out." The cuffs clicked open. Several people gasped. Eleanor didn't move. Not because she froze, but because she knew what came next. That rush cops got when they believed they'd caught someone. That petty thrill of power. He held the keys up, shaking them like confiscated contraband. "You mind telling us again how you got this car?" Eleanor replied, "I bought it." He landed in closer, face inches from hers. "Listen carefully. If you tell us the truth now, I won't charge you with resisting. But if you keep lying, this is going to escalate." Escalate, a word she carried scars from. The second cop took out his notebook, flipping dramatically through blank pages. "Let's start simple, Grandma. Where'd you say you worked?" Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the screen in his hand, his body cam-linked tablet, had just finished loading her file. And the top line, bold and unmissable, was enough to stop both officers cold. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent, retired. Security classification, redacted. They stared at the screen, then at her, then at each other, and the parking lot went silent.
For a full 5 seconds, no one breathed. Not the shoppers frozen mid-step, not the cops caught wide-eyed and pale, not even Eleanor, who had waited her entire adult life to see this expression on a man like Officer Daniels. Shock. Cold. Undeniable. The second cop, Martinez, leaned over Daniel's shoulder to read the tablet screen himself. His lips parted, eyes darting left to right as if he was trying to decode something in a foreign language. "Federal clearance?" he whispered. Daniels didn't answer. Couldn't. because everything he just said, every insult, every sneer, every assumption, was now hanging in the air behind him like a ghost with receipts. The crowd murmured. People lifted their phones higher. Someone whispered, "Oh, damn, is she FBI for real?" Eleanor stood perfectly still, hands at her sides, posture straight. Years of field training lived in the way she held her chin, the way she slowed her breath, the way she waited. She didn't need to say a word. The truth was screaming for her. Daniels finally swallowed hard enough that she heard it. This must be a system error," he stammered, pressing the screen like it might turn into a different answer if he tapped fast enough. It has to be." No one believed him. Not Martinez, not the onlookers, not even the little girl clutching her mother's coat and staring up at Eleanor with wide, starry eyes like she was looking at a superhero. The radio on Daniel's chest crackled again, harsher this time. "Unit 14, do not proceed with detainment. Subject is cleared for federal-level immunity. Secure your location and await callback from Washington." Washington. A woman behind them whispered, "Is that the Washington?" Eleanor couldn't help the faintest twitch of a smile.
Not smug, not petty, just tired satisfaction. Finally. Martinez stepped back so fast he nearly tripped on his own boots. The cuffs in his hand clattered to the pavement. "Ma'am," he blurted, voice cracking. I'm so sorry, we didn't know." Eleanor's eyes flicked to him. Just a flick. That alone shut him up. Daniels wasn't as smart. He puffed out his chest again, stubbornness digging its claws in. "Look," he said, voice wobbling through the bravado, "I don't know who you are, but you can't just flash some fancy federal file and expect us to back off." Eleanor folded her hands in front of her. "I didn't flash anything," she replied calmly. "You're the one who ran my file." Daniels opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Martinez whispered, "Bro, stop talking." But Daniels didn't stop. He was the type who couldn't stand being wrong, especially not in front of a crowd. Especially not in front of a black woman he'd assumed couldn't afford the tires on her own car. "I want verbal confirmation," he snapped into his radio, voice too loud, too desperate. The radio answered instantly, like whoever was on the other end was sitting at full attention. Subject name, Eleanor May Garvey, former Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Classified Counterintelligence Division, clearance level redacted. Repeat, redacted. A wave of whispers rippled through the bystanders. She was FBI? Counterintelligence? Holy, this grandma was a whole agent! A teenage boy filming said, "Ain't no way the cops just harassed an FBI agent." Martinez rubbed his temples. He knew exactly how bad this was. Daniels, however, looked like a man still trying to convince gravity to stop working. "That's impossible," he muttered. She doesn't look like..." Eleanor stepped forward.
"Just one step." "Officer," she said quietly, "finish that sentence." Daniels froze mid-breath. "Go ahead," she added. "Say it out loud." His lips pressed shut so tightly they turned white. Martinez shot him a look that said, "You're on your own." Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't soften. She simply let the silence stretch until the weight of his unspoken prejudice nearly crushed him. Finally, she turned her head slightly. Not to Daniels, not to Martinez, to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice clear, "this happens more often than you think." Phones rose higher. Daniels winced. "I retired after 37 years with the Bureau. I've been in situations most people wouldn't survive. But this, what happened here today, is not unusual. Not for someone who looks like me." Martinez swallowed hard. Daniels looked away. Eleanor didn't break. She never had. The assumption, she went on, that I could not own a car I paid for, that I must be lying, that I must be a thief, she looked directly into Daniel's eyes. That assumption has nearly gotten people killed. Daniel's face collapsed. Ma'am, please, stop. The word hit the asphalt like a gavel. I'm not here to lecture you, but I am here to make something very clear. The wind blew lightly across the parking lot, carrying every syllable like a warning carved in steel. You don't get to judge who someone is by the way they look. Not anymore. Not in this country, not wearing that badge. Daniel's throat bobbed. He looked 15 years younger, small, shaken, exposed. Martinez stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. Special Agent Garvey, what would you like us to do? Eleanor paused. All eyes were on her, all cameras, every breath in the parking lot held. She slowly lifted her hand and pointed at the tablet in Daniel's trembling grip. Start, she said, by rereading the file you didn't believe. Daniels looked at it again, really looked this time. And when he reached the part he'd missed before, his eyes shot wide enough to see the whites under his lashes. A highlight flashed across the screen. Classified federal operations. Subject served on protective assignments for 2 U.S. presidents. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Bro, she protected the president? The president? No way! She ain't just retired, she's legendary! Daniel's voice cracked as he whispered, You worked protection? Eleanor held his gaze, unblinking, steady. I did. I did more than that. But that's all you need to know. And that's when the parking lot suddenly felt too small.
The air in the parking lot vibrated with a strange, buzzing tension, like the moment right before thunder cracks open the sky. Officer Daniels stood frozen, tablet shaking in his hands, sweat rolling down the side of his face. Martinez looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. The crowd pressed closer, phones angled like a field of antennas waiting to catch lightning. And Eleanor? She stood calm, still, composed. The way only someone who'd been trained to keep their pulse at 30 beats per minute during an international hostage standoff could. Just then, Daniel's radio exploded with a sharp metallic beep. Beep, beep, beep. A tone that every officer recognizes instantly. A priority override. From Washington. Not local, not state. Federal. Martinez's eyes went wide. Is that? Before he could finish, a voice blasted through the speaker, crisp and commanding. Patch me through, now. Not a request, not a suggestion, a direct order. Daniels fumbled to switch the channel, almost dropping the radio in the process. His voice cracked as he answered, This is Officer Daniels. Go ahead. The voice cut him off. Put me on speaker. He did. The entire parking lot went dead silent. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to pause mid-flight. A deep, steady voice filled the air. Rich, authoritative, and unmistakably from a higher echelon of government. This is Deputy Director Jonathan Reese of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Martinez staggered back. Deputy Director? A mom holding a child murmured, Oh my God. Someone else whispered, That's basically number 2 in the FBI. Daniel's face drained of color. Reese continued, voice cold as winter steel. Are you currently detaining or attempting to detain Eleanor May Garvey? Daniel swallowed so loudly it echoed. No, sir, we stopped. We tried to... Reese didn't need the details. He already knew. Officer Daniels, Reese said, tone razor sharp, do you understand that Mrs. Garvey is a decorated counterintelligence operative who has served this country at a level you cannot begin to comprehend? The crowd murmured in shock. Daniels opened his mouth, but Reese continued. Do you understand that this woman has sat in the war rooms of 2 administrations? That she has overseen operations that remain classified under national security directives?
that she has risked her life more times than the number of parking tickets you've written. Daniel's voice broke. Sir, I didn't... That, Reese said sharply, is the problem. Eleanor's jaw tightened, not from anger, but from memories. Memories of missions she couldn't speak of. Nights she hadn't slept. Names she carried with her. Sacrifices the world would never know. Reese wasn't done. You put your hands on her. Daniels nearly collapsed. Martinez closed his eyes like he was praying.
And you did it, Reese continued, because she drove a car you didn't think she should have, because she didn't match the profile in your head, because you assumed instead of verifying. The silence afterward was suffocating. Daniels looked like a kid caught stealing from a church. I'm so sorry, sir, he whispered. We misread the situation. Reese's tone grew even colder. Misreading is when you mistake a left turn for a right. What you did was harassment. What you almost did was assault. Gasps erupted through the crowd. Eleanor remained silent, hands clasped in front of her. Her chin was lifted, not in arrogance, but in the quiet dignity of someone who had endured far worse from far more dangerous men. Finally, Reese inhaled sharply. Mrs. Garvey? Eleanor's voice was steady. I'm here. Reese exhaled with relief. Ma'am, I apologize on behalf of this agency and this government. The crowd froze. A federal apology, in public, over open radio. This wasn't normal. This wasn't routine. This was history dripping into the pavement. Eleanor's eyes softened. Thank you, Jonathan. A few people in the crowd blinked. Jonathan? She knew the deputy director personally? Reese continued, his tone shifting, less icy now, more protective. Are you unharmed? I am. Shaken, but I'm all right. Well, Reese said, voice tightening again, that is more than I can say for the two officers standing in front of you. Daniels paled again.
Reese wasn't finished. Effective immediately, both of you are suspended, pending an internal civil rights investigation. Daniels nearly dropped to his knees. Martinez whispered, "Oh, God." But Reese wasn't done. And Officer Daniels, Reese added, expect a personal call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They will want a statement regarding your conduct. Daniels' breath hitched. The crowd whispered furiously. Is he getting fired? Suspended? Federal investigation? Good, he deserves it. That lady is a legend. Eleanor finally stepped forward, slow, measured, commanding the moment without raising her voice. Jonathan, she said gently, that's enough. The deputy director hesitated. Ma'am, they mistreated you. Yes, she said softly, but ruining a man's life won't teach him anything. Only accountability will. Even Martinez, who had barely spoken earlier, had tears in his eyes. Daniels looked up at her like he was seeing a different kind of human being standing in front of him. Someone stronger, someone wiser, someone he never should have underestimated. Reese spoke again, but this time with awe in his voice. Mrs. Garvey, you never change. Eleanor let a small smile touch her lips. Old habits. The radio clicked softly, meaning Reese had switched channels, but not before leaving one final order. Protect her. Do not leave her side. She is national security. The parking lot erupted. Phones shook in people's hands. Daniel stumbled. Martinez straightened like a soldier. And Eleanor, she turned toward the crowd and exhaled. It wasn't over. Not even close. Because the next moment, the one coming around the corner, would flip this entire story upside down. A sleek, black SUV rolled into the parking lot, windows tinted, engine humming, government plates. The crowd gasped. Daniel stepped back. Martinez whispered, "Oh no."
Who is that? Eleanor didn't move, because she already knew. She recognized the sound of that engine. She recognized the vehicle. She recognized the reason it was here. The back door opened.
The black SUV rolled to a stop with the precision of a military maneuver. Clean, controlled, deliberate. The engine shut off, leaving behind a silence so sharp the entire parking lot seemed to hold its breath. Everyone froze. Daniels took one unconscious step backward, as if whatever was inside that vehicle might erase the last 24 hours of his life. Martinez clutched his belt like it was a lifeline. Eleanor Yale? She stood perfectly still, spine straight, chin slightly raised, the way she used to stand when generals addressed the room. She knew exactly who had come. The back door opened, but it didn't swing open like a regular door. It opened the way armored vehicles do, smooth, heavy, soundless. Boots hit the pavement, polished, black, government-issued. The kind that don't show up anywhere unless your name appears in a file 7 layers above classified. The crowd gasped as the first agent stepped out, then the second, then the third, all dressed in crisp suits, communication earpieces glinting, scanning the area with trained, surgical eyes. Their movements were tight and synchronized, like they belonged to an elite division that never needed introductions. And then, a fourth presence stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing an earpiece. He was wearing the kind of expression people only get after spending decades making decisions that changed the fate of nations. Salt and pepper hair, a coat heavy enough to hide body armor, a look that said he'd flown halfway across the country on a single phone call. The crowd parted instinctively, like water around stone. Daniels whispered weakly, "Agency director." He wasn't wrong, because the man now standing in front of Eleanor May Garvey was Director Henry Caldwell, one of the highest-ranking intelligence officials in the United States, a living legend, a ghost in every room he's ever walked into, and the kind of man whose name alone could quiet a room full of generals. He approached Eleanor slowly, respectfully, like she was royalty. When he finally reached her, he didn't offer a handshake. He placed a hand on his heart and bowed. "Ma'am." His voice was low, reverent. "I got your message." The crowd erupted in whispers. "She knows the director? No way! Who is this woman?" "She's somebody big, bigger than we thought." Caldwell straightened and turned toward the 2 trembling officers. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. "Which one of you put your hands on her?" he asked, quietly. Daniel shook so hard the radio clip to his vest vibrated. "Sir, I didn't know who she was." "That," Caldwell said, "is the problem with men like you. You only treat people with dignity when you know their resume." Daniel's knees buckled. Martinez swallowed hard. "But Mrs. Garvey," Caldwell continued, turning back to her, "informed us she prefers a corrective response over a punitive one." Eleanor gave him the same patient smile she used to give young analysts who made rookie mistakes. "They need training, not destruction." Caldwell nodded, accepting her verdict without question. That alone told the crowd everything. She wasn't just respected, she was revered. Then Caldwell stepped closer and lowered his voice, just enough for the crowd to lean in. "We came because you sent an urgent signal," he said. "We thought you were in danger." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I was." That single sentence made every agent in the parking lot shift into a protective stance. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "We're here now." Then, something happened that made Daniel's breathing stop entirely. Director Caldwell turned toward the officers, then towards the crowd, and raised his voice. "This woman," he announced, "is responsible for preventing 3 international incidents the public will never know about." Gasps. "She has protected this country in ways you cannot measure."
Murmurs. And she deserves more respect than she has received here today. Silence. And now, Caldwell said, turning back to her, we're taking her home. But Eleanor shook her head. No. Caldwell blinked. No. She pointed to her car, still running, keys still in the ignition, shopping bag still inside from her quiet morning errand. I came here for groceries, she said, her voice calm but firm, not an escort. The director hesitated. Eleanor, he said softly, protocol. She cut him off. Protocol doesn't apply. I'm retired. The crowd chuckled nervously. But Caldwell? He didn't laugh. He sighed. The sigh of a man who knew better than to argue with her.
Fine, he muttered under his breath, but I'm still sending them with you. She raised an eyebrow. Henry? No, he said. This is non-negotiable. 2 agents immediately stepped forward. Eleanor shook her head again. I'm not fragile. No, Caldwell replied quietly, but some people are dangerous simply because they never learned to think before acting. His eyes cut sharply toward Daniels. Daniels shrank.
The director turned back to Eleanor. Allow them to escort you, please. Eleanor considered the request for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right. Caldwell let out a breath he'd been holding for the last 5 minutes. Then he did something strange, something the crowd did not expect, something that made Daniel's jaw drop. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a phone, and handed it directly to Eleanor. Washington wants to speak with you, he said quietly. All of Washington. The crowd froze. All? Someone whispered. Caldwell nodded. The Chief of Staff, the Defense Committee, and the President's National Security Advisor. Daniels nearly fainted. Eleanor accepted the phone, sighing softly, like this was merely inconvenient. Then she stepped away from the crowd, phone to her ear. Hello, she said gently. Yes, I'm all right. Just a small misunderstanding. She listened for a moment. Then she said something that sent chills down the spine of every witness. No, not the officer's fault. Mine. I should have parked closer to the entrance. The line on the other end practically exploded in panic. She laughed. A warm, amused, grandmotherly laugh. Yes, she said. Of course. I'll stop by when I'm finished with my errands. She hung up the phone and handed it back to Caldwell. Now, can I please get my groceries?
The entire parking lot burst into stunned laughter and whispers. Caldwell turned to the 2 agents beside her. You heard her. Escort Mrs. Garvey to her vehicle. The agents nodded respectfully. Eleanor began walking back toward her car, the same car officers tried to arrest her for owning 10 minutes earlier. But as she walked, every single person in that parking lot moved aside like she was a queen. Phones lowered, heads bowed slightly. Even the children watched her with wide-eyed awe. Daniels stood rooted in place. His world had cracked open. Everything he assumed shattered. Everything he believed challenged. And the worst moment of his life wasn't over yet, because he was about to learn exactly whose car he tried to tow and why it had triggered a federal alarm.
The moment the door slammed shut behind them, the energy shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was tense. The kind of heavy, electric silence that makes you aware of every breath you take. Sergeant Daniel stood by the door, arms crossed, jaw grinding like someone chewing on nails. His badge gleamed under the thin strip of fluorescent light, but for the first time that day, he didn't look powerful. He looked cornered. Officer Hale, the one who tackled Nia, sat at the table, knee-bouncing, eyes flicking between the floor and the mirror on the wall. He knew it wasn't just a mirror. He knew who was behind it. People with authority, people with questions, people who weren't about to let this get buried. And at the head of the table, Nia. calm, straight-backed, hands folded, the very picture of composure. Except her composure had teeth. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to threaten. She didn't need to cry. The silence did that for her. Behind her stood 2 investigators from Internal Affairs, each holding a tablet with the department policy pulled up. Both had already watched the footage from the courthouse hallway, twice. Nia hadn't even asked them to. They did it because they wanted to know how a small woman with no weapon, no resistance, no aggression, ended up slammed onto the tile like a threat. One of them finally broke the silence. "Officer Hale," he said, his voice razor-sharp, "walk us through what exactly you believe constituted active threat behavior from Miss Carter." Hale swallowed, hard. "Well, she refused to comply." "Refused what?" Nia said softly. Her voice wasn't weak. It carried a gentleness that made the question hit harder than a shout would have. Hale blinked rapidly. You didn't present identification when asked." Nia raised a brow. "You mean the identification that was in my hand when you grabbed me?" One of the investigators tapped his screen. "Footage confirms Miss Carter had her state ID visible at the time of the incident." The table went quiet again. Daniel shifted his weight. Hale's legs stopped bouncing. And Nia? She didn't break eye contact, not once. She leaned forward slightly, her tone controlled, powerful, surgical. "I spent 8 months writing the revision to the use of force policy you claim you were following. You quoted Section 4B to me as if I hadn't written it. So I want to know, what exactly made you think I didn't know the law?" Hale's mouth opened, then closed. No answer. The investigator pressed again. "Officer Hale, Nia asked you a policy question. She didn't threaten you. She didn't resist. Explain your escalation." Hale's face flushed. I felt challenged." "Challenged? By what? A woman asking you to follow the rule book?" Daniel shifted again, sweat beginning to bead at his temples. "Look, maybe things got a little heated. Maybe she didn't understand the tone." "The tone?" Nia said softly. "Or the power you thought you had?" Dead silence. The kind that makes everyone hyper-aware of the consequences floating in the air. Hale rubbed his palms on his thighs. "It wasn't supposed to go that way." "But it did. Because you saw a black woman raising her voice slightly, and you read threat where there was only frustration. You saw attitude where there was only accuracy. You saw non-compliance where there was only correction." Nobody interrupted her. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't even angry outwardly. But her words landed with precision, each one a scalpel cutting through excuses. "Officer Hale," she continued, "you didn't escalate because you felt unsafe. You escalated because you felt disrespected. There's a difference." His jaw clenched, and just when the tension climbed to its peak, a knock came on the door. A young clerk entered holding a tablet. "The chief wants Ms. Carter to see this immediately." He handed it to her. On the screen, the entire incident trending online. Millions of views, comments pouring in, people calling for accountability, people recognizing her name from the legal articles she'd written, people saying, "She wrote the law. No wonder she knew the section number." Nia blinked slowly. The investigators exchanged a meaningful look. Daniel's paled, and Hale's shoulders sagged like someone realizing their career had just stepped on a landmine. One investigator turned to them. "Given the public visibility of this incident, we'll be conducting a formal inquiry, effective immediately." Hale lifted his head. Wait, is this suspension level?" The investigator didn't answer. He didn't need to. Daniels exhaled through his nose like a man who suddenly didn't recognize the room he was standing in. Naya didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. Tired of fighting battles she shouldn't have to fight. Tired of educating men who weaponize their authority. Tired of proving her humanity in rooms built to ignore it. But she also looked unbroken, unshakable, unmoved. She stood up, gathering her folder. "If you need anything further, you know where to find me." And as she walked toward the door, Hale whispered, without looking up, "I'm sorry." Naya paused, hand on the doorknob. She didn't turn around. She didn't soften, but she said, just loud enough to hear, "Learn enough that you never do it again." Then she stepped out, and the room felt colder without her. By the time Nia stepped out of the interrogation room, the courthouse hallways had changed. People weren't whispering anymore. They were looking at her, not with pity, not with confusion, but with that stunned, electric awareness people get when they realize someone just flipped the whole script. A young clerk who'd seen the incident earlier, the same one who looked away when Hale grabbed her, now met her eyes and gave a small, apologetic nod. A security guard who didn't lift a finger before now stood a little straighter when she passed. Nia didn't bask in any of it. She just walked, measured, steady, dignified. But the moment she stepped outside into the cold afternoon air, everything exploded. Because someone had gone live. Actually, a lot of someone's. And the video of her being slammed to the ground by an officer, then calmly reciting the exact law he violated, then revealing she wrote that law, had ignited the internet like dry brush in August. Phones lifted. People murmured. A crowd began forming fast. Too fast. A man in a business suit jogged toward her, breathless. Ma'am, excuse me. Are you the attorney from the video? The one who wrote the policy?" She blinked. "I'm a legislative analyst, not an attorney." Right, sorry," he said, waving his hands frantically. "Listen, my wife just sent me the clip. It's everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, X, even LinkedIn. LinkedIn! People are furious." Another woman joined in, holding up her phone. "Is this really you?" A freeze frame of Nia mid-sentence, her finger pointed at Hale as she quoted the exact statute he butchered. Nia felt a knot form in her throat. "Yes," she said quietly. The woman shook her head in disbelief. "I've never seen someone check a cop so calmly. You were like a walking policy manual with attitude." Another voice chimed in. "They picked the wrong one today." Then another. "You handled that with grace and fire." Someone else shouted, "You want a lawyer? We'll crowdfund 10." Nia actually laughed, a short, surprised breath. But then came the moment she didn't expect. A tall man stepped forward from the back of the crowd. He looked older, late 60s, weathered, steady presence, wearing a veteran's cap. He held a cane but moved with purpose. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "my daughter sent me that video while I was in the doctor's waiting room." She hesitated, but shook his hand. He continued, "I served 22 years. I've dealt with my share of officers who thought a uniform made them untouchable. Today, you reminded a lot of people that the law is bigger than a badge." Nia swallowed hard. "I just wanted them to follow their own rules." He nodded slowly. "And you made them." Behind him, someone yelled, "Press is coming through!" And sure enough, reporters rounded the corner, cameras already rolling. Nia instinctively stepped back. Not fear, just exhaustion. One reporter pushed forward, mic raised. "Ms. Carter, dozens of civil rights organizations have already issued statements. Your video has over 5 million views in under 2 hours. Do you plan to pursue legal action?" Another shouted, "Do you feel this incident reflects systemic bias in the courthouse police department?" A third, "Is it true you wrote part of the state's use of force legislation?" Nia raised both hands, gently. "I'm not giving statements right now." But then she did something she didn't plan. She looked directly into one of the cameras, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the clarity of someone who'd had enough, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been dismissed, minimized, underestimated. "What happened today?" she said softly. "Shouldn't have happened to anyone. Not because I wrote a law, not because I knew the policy number, but because I'm human." And they forgot that. The crowd fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their mics a little. "I don't want attention," she continued. "I want accountability. I want officers who understand that authority isn't a weapon. And I want people to know they're allowed to stand up for themselves, even in a hallway full of badges." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Then, as if the universe was done being subtle, her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Unknown number, governor's office. Her heart skipped. The crowd leaned in, sensing something big. She answered quietly. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice she recognized immediately from televised addresses. "Miss Carter, this is Governor Ailes. I just watched the video. I want you to know I'm launching an independent review of the Courthouse Police Department effective immediately. And," she closed her eyes, "and I'd also like you to join the task force overseeing it." She froze. The governor continued, "Frankly, we need someone who knows the law better than the people enforcing it." Nia felt a wave of emotion crash through her. Pride, relief, disbelief, exhaustion. But above all, vindication. "Governor," she whispered, "I'd be honored." When she hung up, the crowd watched her expectantly. She didn't grandstand. She didn't make a speech. She just smiled, small, tired, but undeniably triumphant. "Things," she said gently, "are about to change." And for the first time all day, it felt true.
By the following morning, the video wasn't just viral, it had become unavoidable. Every news station, every timeline, every breakfast table conversation. Everyone was talking about the woman who wrote the law a cop tried to arrest her with. And at the center of that storm, Officer Hale. The man who once swaggered through the courthouse halls, bullying whoever he thought couldn't fight back, was now sitting in a conference room, pale as a sheet, his badge on the table in front of him. The internal affairs investigator slid a tablet across the table. "Is this you?" The screen paused on the moment he slammed Nia to the floor and smirked. Hale didn't answer, because there was no answer. There was only the truth and millions of witnesses. Another investigator chimed in. "The governor has ordered a full review of your department's use of force protocols, and Miss Carter has agreed to oversee the task force." Hale's head snapped up. "She did what?" The investigator didn't blink. "You assaulted the woman who helped write the law you violated. She's more qualified to lead the review than anyone here." Hale's eyes darted to the floor. His career wasn't crumbling. It was evaporating, like smoke in sunlight. Meanwhile, in a very different room, Nia sat at the long oak conference table in the governor's office, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The view from the 30th floor was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the chaos outside, where supporters were gathering with signs reading, "Respect the law, start with the badge." "Nia Carter for justice reform. You mess with the wrong woman." The governor entered with a warm smile. "Are you ready for day one?" he asked. Nia exhaled steady, but still processing the whirlwind her life had become. "As ready as anyone can be after becoming a meme overnight." He chuckled. "A good meme, at least." But then he grew serious. "You didn't just expose one officer. You exposed a culture. People are watching what happens next." She nodded, setting down her tea. "Then we're going to show them accountability." "Good," he said, "because the state is listening." Back at the courthouse, the other officers were quieter now. Not fearful, just reflective. They watched the video again. Some winced, some shook their heads. One young officer spoke softly. "She warned him, she gave him every chance." Another muttered, "He thought she was powerless. That's what he does." The commander entered, expression firm. "Let today be a reminder that authority is borrowed, not owned, and the public can take it back." She paused.
And Miss Carter will be helping rewrite our entire training curriculum. A few officers straightened up. A few gulped. Change wasn't just coming. It had arrived and taken the front seat. The final moment. Later that evening, Nia finally returned home. Exhausted, sore, but alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. The world could wait. She needed a moment to breathe. She stepped onto her porch, the sun setting in soft amber. The air smelled like promise, like something shifting in the right direction. A neighbor across the street, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, raised a hand. "Baby, you made us proud today." Nia smiled, the kind that reaches the heart before the face. "Thank you," she said softly. "I just stood up." The woman shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart, you stood tall, and the whole world saw." Nia closed her eyes for a long second, letting it sink in, letting it settle. Because she hadn't asked for this fight, but she had won it. Not with violence, not with yelling, but with knowledge, courage, and unshakable dignity. And somewhere across town, in a dim office where a disgraced officer now sat staring at the badge he no longer deserved, the lesson was clearer than ever. When the law is written by a black woman who refuses to bow, the badge doesn't get the last word. She does. And she just did.